Hello there and welcome to Black Bear Atheist. Here we are again on Apologetics Roadshow, going through this road and show with him. That was a terrible introduction. Anyways, this is part 3 of the resurrection of Jesus, fact or fiction. And Apologetics Roadshow is trying to use the evidence that we have, the things that we know of fact, to conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. So far, it has showed that Jesus definitely died, and he is pointing out things that biblical scholars agree actually happened. For example, that Jesus actually exists. Another thing that Jesus' followers after he died believe he rose from the dead. They believe he rose from the dead. From this, he has already concluded that Jesus definitely rose from the dead. But let's finish the video because I think it's still important to hear his finishing thoughts.
So, there's only one conclusion to draw from the facts that even atheist and agnostic scholars grant as historically certain. And yet, atheist and agnostic scholars clearly don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Why do they reject the resurrection when they're aware of the historical evidence?
I won't call what you have an historical evidence. You have things like eyewitness that are not even eyewitness. This is our low bar, what you can consider evidence. Historians don't just conclude something happened simply because someone wrote it down. There's many factors that lead into it. They look at the archaeologist ties into this. The historian looking at the text ties into this. Studying the text ties into this. Trying to find the people, trying to find the clues ties into this. What you have is anonymous writers writing something down that they have learned through oral traditions. Yes, there's, as you point out in the second video, part 2, check that out. Part in the New Testament that are doctrines that have been taught right after Jesus died, like the resurrection. That shows that they were believing from the very beginning that Jesus rose from the dead. Is the belief that Jesus rose from the dead and writing it down enough for us to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead? Is the belief enough to say Jesus rose from the dead? Or is the best option to say I don't know? Let's keep going.
Different people will give different reasons for denying Jesus' resurrection, but if you do a little digging, two broad issues emerge most frequently. First, many people have a prior commitment to naturalism. Supernatural explanations are ruled out before the investigation begins. And if supernatural explanations are ruled out beforehand, Jesus' resurrection is never even a candidate for belief.
This is because if you put supernatural events into science or anything that you're doing, then everything is possible. Oh, men can fly, humans can. Yeah, that's possible. It is. Jesus did it. Actually, wasn't that when he already turned to a god? Honestly, I don't even know. It's possible. With supernatural, everything is possible. There's no impossibility with supernatural. We can't study the supernatural. We can't know if anything is for certain is supernatural.
Commitment to naturalism a good reason to reject the resurrection? As Alvin Flanagan.
Yes, because there's not enough evidence to conclude a supernatural event actually happened. People have always believed supernatural events happen. They've always believed it. But there's actually never any evidence for a supernatural event. And the Bible definitely isn't one of them. It's not evidence for a supernatural event. It's just more people believing a supernatural event happened and wrote it down.
And others have shown naturalism as a worldview is fundamentally incoherent because it ends up undermining the reliability of the cognitive faculties required to affirm it. If naturalism is true, how did you obtain your cognitive faculties, the processes that produce your beliefs? There's really only one game in town if you're a naturalist. Your ability to reason is the product of natural selection acting on random mutation. Natural selection, of course, favors traits that help organisms survive and reproduce. So if human reasoning evolved naturally, it's because it helped human beings survive and reproduce. Does this give us any basis for trusting our reasoning ability when it comes to questions of theology or philosophy or science? No. At best,
I agree with that conclusion. No, we shouldn't trust our brain completely, but we should trust it in the fact that it helps us survive, so it works. That's why we have systems like science to help us remove those biases as much as possible. Because we understand that we are biased and our brain doesn't always tell us the truth. It lies to us. A perception and seeing things, it lies to us. Our brain sees things, deceives us. And we understand that, and that's why we create something like science, so we could find the best way to explain the things around us.
cognitive faculties would be reliable when it comes to finding berries or using a spear against an enemy or doing something to attract a mate.
Which works.
Interestingly, Darwin himself noticed this problem. He said, "But with me..."
Before we read that again, Darwin is not the end all nor all for evolution. And evolution is not just a theory, it has factual evidence supporting its claims. More than Christians or any theist have. But here we're just addressing Christianity, so more than Christianity have to give.
The horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? Naturalism isn't a pillar of rationality, it's a pillager of rationality. But a more glaring difficulty, given a discussion of miracles, is the global abundance of miracle claims. In 2000,
and I have not cursed at all in this video, so I'm gonna give myself one here. Nobody gives a shit about the claims. It doesn't matter whether they claim that they can fly, whether they claim they see supernatural event, a tornado is speaking to them, they're speaking to God and they can pray. Nobody gives a fuck. It's a matter of what you can prove. Can you prove any of that? No. It's a matter of what you can give evidence for. And you can't.
2006, the Pew Forum issued a report titled Spirit and Power, a 10-country survey of Pentecostals, discussing statistics on Pentecostals and charismatic Protestants in the United States, Brazil, Chile, Guatemala, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, India, the Philippines, and South Korea. And the researchers found that approximately 200 million Pentecostal and charismatic Protestants in just those 10 countries believe that they have personally witnessed miraculous healings.
And I understand that because I have been one of those people that believe in supernatural events. Until I understand and see that there's no evidence for one, it was just me believing that it happened. Just a bunch of self-fulfilling prophecies. Oh, I want to get a good grade. I studied myself and so like God was coming down to write the test for me. That was just me doing what I prayed for.
Imagine what the numbers would be if the study had included all denominations in all countries.
Yeah, I get it. It would be in the billions.
In a 2022 article for the New York Times, Dr. Molly Worthen writes, "Scholars estimate that 80% of new Christians in Nepal come to the faith through an experience with healing or deliverance from demonic spirits. Perhaps as many as 90% of new converts who join a house church in China credit their conversion to faith healing. In Kenya, 71% of Christians say they have witnessed a divine healing, according to a 2006 Pew study. Even in the
We're talking 80% of new Christians in Nepal, I believe that's in India, healing or deliverance from demonic spirits. There's no evidence for any demonic spirits, and every time we try to test whether someone is actually getting healed from praying for them, there's been no evidence of actually someone getting healed. I have been into church and heard of people saying they were healed by God, and the next 2 days that I see them, they're saying, "Oh, we're back to the back pain." It's just them convincing themselves that they're being healed. Again, believing in something strongly could do a lot of shit. These are just beliefs, these are just claims. They don't prove anything.
Relatively skeptical United States, 29% of survey respondents claim they have seen one.
Also, doesn't that show a lot? United States more advanced than all these other countries that you name, including China. Majority wise, yeah. On average, yeah. You see, the more poor the country is, the more you see people believing in supernatural stuff and believing that it happens. The more uneducated or people don't actually know how things work around them, the more they would think even the wind blowing is a supernatural event. Oh, tornado happened 300 miles away from me. That's God telling me to move. Like, that's the kind of thing that happens and people will translate as a supernatural event.
After reviewing a number of miracle reports from around the world, Dr. Craig Keener concludes, "It is no longer plausible to tout uniform human experience as a basis for denying miracles, as in the traditional modern argument. Hundreds of millions of claims would have to be satisfactorily explained in non-supernatural terms for this appeal to succeed."
Or I could just ignore their ass because they're just making claims based on their emotions. And every time someone actually do a research on this, try to prove whether this is actually any supernatural event, they end up finding nothing. I have tested this myself. Pray about something, pray for people, pray for healing, pray for someone to rise from the dead or something along those lines. And nothing. Every time they actually try to test this, nothing happens. Doesn't that show something that these people were just believing? Again, people could believe, it doesn't prove that it actually happens. This does not actually support any of your points. So far you've been doing great until you start presenting things that doesn't make sense. It just does not prove shit. And if this much people were believing in supernatural events today, imagine how terrible it is 2,000 years ago. And that's how people believe Jesus could rise from the dead.
While many may be so explained, one cannot adopt the conclusion of uniformity as a premise without investigating all of them. In other words, those who exclude supernatural explanations prior to investigation do so by faith, not because the evidence demands it.
So you want me to go around and investigate 200 million people who decided to believe in something through blind faith and not actually know what they're saying, they just believe because they believe. And every time someone tries to test it out, get a pastor to test it out, get a bunch of people, religious people to test it out, nothing. And also, I must also point out that other religious people, the study he presented, I just realized, is just for the Christian church, but other people, other religion, also have similar things of spiritual events and them getting healed. What makes yours special? And then Christians keep forgetting, even if you say, oh yeah, we have this historical base for our religion. You keep forgetting the fact that other people, including Muslims, Jews, feel other spiritual things happening to them. What about that? Again, these are just beliefs. doesn't prove shit.
Second, it's perhaps even more common to reject the resurrection because of what the resurrection implies. If we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, we might think it's a good idea to listen to what he says. But Jesus
Wrong. I mean, most of you already doing that. I, most of you already doing that. Like over 60% of the population in the US already doing that, listening to what Jesus has to say. Well, Jesus didn't say anything on women being equal to men. Neither did he say anything about slavery being wrong. Moving on.
said all kinds of things about sin and judgment and salvation, and if we don't want to take his teachings seriously, or if we don't want to become Christians, or if we despise anything that has any connection to Christianity, we kind of need to get rid of that whole rising from the dead thing. Now,
I really was liking this guy until now. He just fall back to the same old usual apologetic shit that I'm used to. Oh, people just want to sin and they don't want to follow the Bible. That's why they just become an atheist. No. You're just saying it in a different way, but that's exactly the point of what you're saying. People just want to believe, people just want to sin and do and not follow Christ, so they decided to say the resurrection isn't true. There's actually not enough evidence to conclude that a supernatural event happened and Jesus rose from the dead. You're still doing this based on faith. It's not like you actually have grounded evidence to say it did happen. You don't.
this has always seemed like an odd approach to me. Decide what we want to believe ahead of time, and then reject evidence that doesn't line up with what we want to believe. And atheists normally condemn this approach. Suppose an atheist comes to you with some kind of evidence. Let's say he gives you evidence for common descent, the claim that all living things share a common ancestor.
I believe that's part of the evolutionary theory, and he also has evidence supporting its claims. Again, I will believe more than Christians do.
If your response is, well, I don't like what common descent implies because that would mean I'm related to pigs, so I'm going to reject any evidence you give me for it, the atheist will accuse you of being anti-science and anti-evidence and irrational and stupid and bigoted and so on.
How the fuck the bigoted got into the conversation? No, that's not how that works. You can be an atheist and still be bigoted. Like, what are you even talking about? And yeah, I think to an extent Christians look too deep into the evidence that they believe they have. But I still won't call them completely irrational. I could see how someone like you could reason and look at the Bible and say, well, there's this, there's that, then this is the best conclusion. But you also have to have the idea that there's a supernatural thing happening in the world. Which also there's no evidence of, really, because we've tried to test that. There's never been any evidence of that. But I could see how someone could come to that conclusion. I could see that. I won't say it's completely irrational, but I could see how someone can reason their way to being a Christian to an extent. If they already have the proposition that there's some things in the world that are supernatural.
But then, if you present that same atheist with evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, you'll
Oh, please. I get whatever you have done for the past 24 minutes, but that is not evidence for what Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus did not rose from the dead. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know.
suddenly find that heaven and hell and the Salem witch trials and gay wedding cakes and all kinds of other topics are entering into his evaluation of whether Jesus was dead and whether he was alive again later.
Not me. I don't care about those events. That comes that comes to play when you ask me whether I will follow Jesus if Jesus actually rose from the dead, whether I will believe in your God and follow your God if this is all true. That plays into that factor. But when it comes to whether Jesus actually rose from the dead as an historical fact, it doesn't play into that factor. It does not even border that line. What plays into that factor is everything the Bible has said. For example, Jesus is supposed to be the one that will save humanity. Is the person that's supposed to save humanity, should he come from the middle of nowhere? A place where most people won't even know and they won't write about him while he was alive doing miracles? Does that make any sense? And this all-loving, all-knowing God, not all-loving, that factor is not in there. This all-knowing God knows exactly where he could place Jesus to have most of his miracles be written down by people. But that's exactly not, he didn't do any of that. This all plays into the factor that Jesus was born in the middle of nowhere, and you want me to believe that he rose from the dead. When you factor all of the supernatural events in, you notice that it doesn't make sense. And I started looking at Christianity from a supernatural idea. From a supernatural. I believe the supernatural before I become, I guess you could consider me a naturalist, but I'm here for wherever the evidence presents. So if the evidence says there's a supernatural event, well, I guess I'm prone to believe, I'm going to start believing in a supernatural things, that it actually happens. I come from a supernatural view, believing everything the Bible said, following everything what the Bible said. It's where I came from. Believing that supernatural events happens from left to right, even though they were just natural things looking back. If you want to claim Jesus rose from the dead, please present actual evidence. You're deducting this from what we know. I guess that's to an extent rational. At least you're presenting scholarly finds to make a conclusion. So better than what most Christians would do. But when you look at what you actually present, the best conclusion is that we don't know. Because hasn't been any evidence of a supernatural event, just people believing that there is. And if we were to believe the supernatural exists, then it's impossible to even come to a conclusion about anything. Because anything is impossible. Everything is impossible. Possible. What am I saying? Everything is possible. Let's finish the video.
Feelings become the ultimate trump card.
That is what you're doing. That is what you're doing. That is what you're doing. And I've liked you thus far until now. That is what you're doing. Coming from a feeling standpoint. Because the evidence should conclude, based on what we have so far, it should be, we don't know. We know Jesus died. Definitely died. Based on what we know about the Romans and how they did this shit, he definitely died. And then we have people believing that he rose from the dead. It's a belief. We don't know whether he did rose from the dead. It is another one coming from an emotional standpoint, bro. Again, I won't go to emotions until you do present. You ask me the question, will you follow Jesus? Like Frank Turek does.
We obviously can't stop our atheist friends from smuggling their feelings about Christianity into discussions of historical facts about Jesus, but we can point out how ridiculous it is for them to claim to be the champions of reason and science and logic when their feelings and emotions have full reign over their reasoning. Now, there's other evidence that's relevant to this discussion, and there are additional objections to consider. But we already have enough to conclude that Jesus rose from the dead.
No, we don't.
The available evidence tells us that Jesus died by crucifixion and that he was alive again later. Friends
That people believed he was alive later. And Paul is not a fool. Paul is not a fool because he never knew Jesus. He hated Christians, but not Jesus because he never knew him. So how did he somehow recognize that that was Jesus?
and foes were so thoroughly convinced that Jesus had appeared to them that they were willing to endure torture and death for the privilege of proclaiming the Christian message.
I was also point out that Paul saw Jesus, I believe about 3 years. The scholarly concludes that he saw Jesus after 3 years, that Jesus already rose from the dead. So that means Jesus came back from heaven or some shit, because he went to heaven after he showed himself to a bunch of people. Even though I must also point out that they were doubting that it was Jesus. He just died 3 days ago and they're doubting that that is Jesus. Doesn't that also show something? That they were doubting Jesus. They were doubting the fact that he rose from the dead. That's just stupid. If someone died and you see them 3 days ago and then they rose back and you buried them and then they rose back 3 days later, what changed? How come you don't fucking recognize them? That's also a part to look at.
The question for us is this: what could have convinced all these people that Jesus had appeared to them? This is the question I struggled with almost 3 decades ago, and I couldn't think of any explanation apart from the resurrection that could account for the historical evidence. By that time, I already knew that naturalism was a theory in crisis, and I didn't trust my feelings enough to reject facts I didn't like. In the end, I concluded that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead.
So you're arguing that Jesus rose from the dead. You're trying to see if it's a fact or a fiction. And you already conclude that it's a fact. But people who actually study the Bible, scholars, don't believe Jesus actually rose from the dead. The things that you actually presented earlier on shows that people, they deduct that from what they could find, that people believe Jesus rose from the dead. And you also point out that people are more prone to believing in supernatural events today. By showing us that stat of people who believe that aliens and demons exist and they're healed from them. That's today. 200 million, you said? That is today. Imagine how worse it would be 2,000 years ago. And that's how people believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Because if you're already believing that a supernatural event can happen and everything can happen, then you're prone to believe that it's possible for Jesus to rise from the dead. And that's exactly what happened. It's not enough evidence to conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. It's enough evidence to say, we don't know. But people definitely did believe he rose from the dead. If that's enough for you to believe and become a Christian, please, by all means, go ahead, like he did. It's not for me. It's not enough for me. And I'm not coming from an emotional standpoint, like he said. I'm coming from a reasoning standpoint that just people believing that this happened doesn't mean I have to believe. Doesn't mean it actually happened. It's not enough. However, I must give credit where credit is due. I think this is where I call it. He is better than all the apologetics that I have seen on the internet anywhere, all together combined. He actually presents scholarly findings to make a conclusion. I won't call it reasonable conclusion because I didn't come to that. I would think the best reasonable conclusion you can come to is that we don't know whether Jesus exists. But at least he presents his reasoning for why he believes. He actually looks at his scholar's findings and come to to, in his own sense, a reasonable conclusion. It's better than what Frank Turek did and just straw man on straw man and bullshit on bullshit. It's better what than Cliff does, again, bullshit on bullshit. So far, I like this guy. I think it's just confused to what Christianity have. You don't have evidence. You have not even eyewitnesses. And you don't have as much as you think you have. You don't have 500. Go find that scholarly finding. Why do you think people that are historians that actually study this and study the Bible are not Christians? Is it because they just want to sin? I don't think so. Because I didn't become an atheist because I just want to sin. I was sinning more when I was a Christian. There are other factors to this. The fact that we don't know. I think that's the best standpoint. Well, if you like the video, sorry about me ranting for too long. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.